The first encounter. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewing window of the Starfire, a small but battle-worn exploration vessel drifting in the silence of deep space. Commander Ethan Hayes exhaled slowly, watching the blinking lights on his console. A distress beacon had pulled him to this desolate sector, one that shouldn't have had any activity for centuries. His ship's AI, Echo, chirped in his earpiece. "Commander, the signal source has been identified. It originates from an abandoned space station in orbit around the collapsed remains of a red giant." Ethan leaned forward, frowning. Abandoned. Who left a distress beacon active for gods know how long? Unknown. However, I detect faint life signs. That piqued his interest. Life signs on an ancient, derelict station in the middle of nowhere. He had learned long ago that space rarely held simple mysteries. This was either a trap or something worth discovering. "Prepare for docking," he ordered, "and keep the weapon systems primed, just in case." The Starfire maneuvered gracefully into the docking bay, its landing clamps hissing as they latched onto the station's rusted frame. A low hum resonated through the ship as Ethan geared up. Light armor, a pulse rifle strapped to his back, and his personal sidearm holstered at his hip. He wasn't expecting a firefight, but the void had a nasty habit of proving him wrong. As the airlock cycled open, a stale metallic scent filled his nostrils. The station was dark, save for emergency lighting flickering like dying fireflies. The air was cold, sterile. Echo's voice crackled in his helmet. "Atmosphere intact but deteriorating. Oxygen levels are low, but breathable for a limited time." Ethan moved cautiously through the narrow corridors, his boots making no sound against the metal flooring. The place was ancient. Its walls bore markings and symbols he didn't recognize, though they pulsed faintly, suggesting the remnants of some long-lost technology. The distress beacon led him deeper, to what appeared to be a cryogenic storage chamber. Tall pods lined the walls, most of them shattered or dark, their occupants long since turned to dust. But one remained intact, glowing softly with a strange silver-blue light. A figure lay inside. Ethan's breath caught. It was a woman. Her skin was a deep amethyst, smooth and luminous even in the dim lighting. Silver hair cascaded around her face, floating slightly as if caught in some unseen current. Bioluminescent tattoos pulsed along her arms and collarbone, shifting in color like liquid stardust. She was unlike any species he had ever seen, but she was alive. The control panel next to the pod flickered weakly, the script unreadable. Ethan hesitated, then reached for his wrist console, activating a basic translation program. Slowly, the alien text resolved into something he could understand. "Cryogenic stasis active. Last CYCL 4,792 years ago. Stasis ending sequency initiated." Ethan's eyes widened. Almost 5,000 years. Who was she? Why had she been left here? The hiss of escaping air filled the chamber as the pod seals disengage. The glass slid open, mist spilling out like cold breath. Her golden eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she stared at him, her gaze unfocused, distant. Then, like a wave crashing into shore, awareness returned, and her body tensed. Her lips parted, and a single word slipped from them, spoken in a voice like a song carried through the void. "Why have you awakened me?" Her language was unlike anything Ethan had heard, yet the translator in his earpiece struggled to piece together fragments of meaning. He took a slow step back, raising his hands in a universal sign of peace. "I don't mean you any harm," he said. "I found your distress beacon." Before he could finish, the lights in the chamber shifted from blue to red. A deep guttural alarm echoed through the station. Echo's voice rang in his helmet, sharp with urgency. "Commander, I'm detecting multiple inbound vessels. They just entered the system." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What kind of ships?" "Unknown, but they are heavily armed and moving fast. They're heading straight for the station." The woman in the pod sat up abruptly, her body still weak, but her expression filled with recognition and fear. She turned to Ethan, her glowing tattoos dimming as she spoke again, this time her words clearer, as if the translator was finally catching up. They found me. Ethan didn't know who they were, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to like the answer. Time to go, he said, grabbing her wrist gently. She flinched at his touch, but didn't resist. Can you walk? She nodded, though unsteady. Supporting her, Ethan guided them back toward the docking bay. The station trembled as the first enemy ships entered orbit. He barely made it through the airlock when his ship's defense systems blared a warning. Enemy fighters are locking onto us, Echo reported. Ethan cursed. Strap in. This is going to get rough. The woman stared at him, her golden eyes filled with a mix of fear and something else, something unreadable. Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice soft but urgent. Ethan powered up the thrusters, gripping the controls with steady hands. He glanced at her, a small, almost amused smile playing on his lips. Call it human instinct. With that, the Starfire roared to life, breaking free from the station's decaying orbit, just as enemy ships swarmed in behind them. The chase had begun, and Ethan had no intention of losing. The escape. The Starfire jolted violently as enemy ships opened fire, streaks of plasma slicing through the void just meters from its hull. Ethan gritted his teeth, gripping the controls with practiced precision. The ship's shields flared under the impact, but they wouldn't hold for long, not against whatever advanced tech these pursuers had. The alien woman, Cirili, as she had managed to whisper in the chaos, clutched the edge of the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes darting between Ethan and the view outside. They won't stop, she said, her voice edged with urgency. They've hunted me for centuries. They don't fail. Ethan smirked, a defiant glint in his storm-gray eyes. Yeah, well, neither do I. With a sharp pull on the controls, he sent the Starfire into a steep dive, dodging a burst of incoming fire. The ship spiraled through the wreckage of long-dead vessels floating near the station, using the debris as a temporary shield. The enemy ships, larger and heavily armed, struggled to maneuver as nimbly. Echo, status. Ethan barked, hands flying over the console to reroute power to the engines. The AI's voice crackled in his earpiece. Shields at 43%. Evasive maneuvers are delaying pursuit, but long-term survival is unlikely. Ethan shot a glance at Cirili. Any brilliant ideas? Her expression darkened as she pressed a hand to her temple, the glowing tattoos along her arms flickering. There's a nearby asteroid field. Dense. I can guide us through. Ethan arched a brow. You sure about that? One wrong move and we're space dust. She met his gaze, her golden irises intense. Trust me. A split-second decision. He'd barely known her for 15 minutes, yet something about her, about this entire situation, told him she was worth trusting. Echo, set course for those asteroids. Full throttle. The Starfire surged forward, leaving the station behind as enemy ships closed in. Ethan glanced at Cirili. All right, princess. Show me the way. She inhaled, closing her eyes for the briefest moment, then reached out, her fingers dancing over the console. Though unfamiliar with the ship's interface, she navigated as if guided by instinct. Left. Sharp. Now, she commanded. Ethan obeyed without hesitation, banking hard just as a plasma blast grazed their rear thruster. The ship bucked, warning lights flashing, but they pressed forward into the asteroid belt. The field was a chaotic labyrinth of spinning rocks, some the size of moons, others no larger than the ship itself. Cirili's directions were precise, threading them through impossibly tight gaps as their pursuers hesitated at the entrance. They won't risk damaging their ships, Cirili murmured. Ethan exhaled sharply, adjusting the thrusters to stabilize their course. Good. Means we got time. For the first time since waking, Cirili allowed herself to breathe. But her moment of relief was short-lived. "They will wait," she warned, watching the radar. "They know I have nowhere to go. They'll set a blockade outside the field, waiting for us to make a mistake." Ethan frowned, checking their fuel reserves. They couldn't stay hidden forever, and fighting them head-on wasn't an option. Not yet. Then, something caught his eye. A gravitational anomaly on the edge of the asteroid field. It wasn't a planet, but something massive was there, hidden in the darkness. "What is that?" he muttered. Sarilai followed his gaze and stiffened. "A relic." Ethan turned to her, intrigued. "A relic." She hesitated, then nodded. "A sanctuary from a time before, when my people still lived." Her voice carried a weight of sorrow. "It may hold answers." Ethan considered their options: stay and wait to be found, or take a gamble on something older than human history. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Well, I do love a good mystery." He pushed the engines forward, steering the Starfire deeper into the unknown. The hunt was far from over. But for now, the game had changed. The hidden world. The Starfire weaved through the asteroid field, battered but intact, until the gravitational anomaly loomed ahead. What at first appeared as a shadow against the void soon resolved into something far more astonishing: a massive structure, half buried in the rocky debris. Ethan's fingers tightened on the controls. "That's not just a relic," he murmured. "It's a ship." Cyrilai's golden eyes shimmered with something between awe and grief. "Not just any ship," she whispered. "It's a sanctuary, one of the last arcs my people built before." She trailed off, but Ethan didn't need her to finish. Before they were hunted, before they fell. The massive vessel was unlike anything in human records, organic curves interwoven with sleek, crystalline technology. Bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly along its fractured hull, still clinging to life despite centuries, maybe millennia, of abandonment. "Echo," Ethan called, guiding the Starfire toward a docking bay. "Scan it." The AI hesitated before responding. "Scans are inconclusive. The structure is disrupting most readings. However, I detect breathable atmosphere in sections of the interior." Ethan exhaled. That was good enough for him. "Princess, you think you can get us inside?" Sarilai, still staring at the ship, nodded absently. I think so." As the Starfire docked, the Ark responded. Its entrance pulsed with energy, scanning them as if sensing Sarilai's presence. Then, slowly, the bay doors creaked open, granting them passage. Ethan shot her a look. "I take it that's not a coincidence." She shook her head, visibly unsettled. "It knows me." The inside of the Ark was breathtaking. Unlike the station where she had been entombed, this place was alive, barely, but undeniably so. Towering halls stretched endlessly, adorned with shifting, iridescent walls. The air was thick with an ancient scent, something Ethan could only describe as the memory of a forgotten world. Sarilai moved ahead as if drawn by unseen forces. Ethan followed, scanning the environment. "You ever been on one of these before?" She hesitated before shaking her head. "No, but I was meant to." They passed what looked like stasis pods, rows upon rows of them, dark and lifeless. Ethan's stomach clenched at the sheer scale of loss. "You said this was a sanctuary," he murmured. "A refuge." Sarilai swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "A last hope." But they never made it. Ethan didn't push her for details. He could see the pain in her posture, the way her fingers curled against her arms, as if bracing against unseen ghosts. Then, suddenly, the ship spoke, or rather sang. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating through the very walls. Ethan's HUD flickered erratically, unable to process what he was hearing. Sarilai gasped. "The Ark recognizes me," she murmured. "It's awakening." Ethan's gut tightened. "And what exactly does that mean?" Before she could answer, the hum shifted, turning into an alarm. Echo's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, I'm detecting movement outside the asteroid field. The enemy fleet is repositioning." Cyrile's expression darkened. "They know we're here." Ethan cursed, pulling out his sidearm instinctively. "Can this ship fight?" Cyrile turned toward a central console, one that had flickered to life the moment she stepped near it. "It was built for survival," she said. "It has defenses, if I can activate them." Outside, the asteroid field trembled as the enemy ships began their slow advance, searching for their prey. Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon, his pulse steady despite the odds. "If this thing was meant to be a sanctuary," he said, stepping beside her, "then let's make damn sure it still is." And together, they prepared to awaken the last remnants of an empire long thought dead. The betrayal. The Orcs' control interface pulsed beneath Cyrile's touch, responding to her presence with a whispered hum of recognition. She was the last of her kind, and the ship knew it. As her fingertips danced across the console, symbols shifted, forming pathways of glowing data. Ethan stood beside her, watching the ship stir to life. Outside, the enemy fleet was closing in. Their sleek, predatory vessels skimmed the edges of the asteroid field, scanning, waiting. "Tell me you've got defenses," Ethan muttered, gripping his sidearm. Cyrile didn't look up. The ship was never meant for war, but my people were not without caution. The ship shuddered as deep within its core, something ancient awakened. A low vibration coursed through the floor, and the asteroid field around them began to shift, subtle at first, then violently. Ethan's eyes widened as the space around them seemed to move, as if guided by an unseen force. "The Ark controls the debris field?" he asked. Cyrile gave him a small, almost proud smile. "We built with nature, not against it." As the enemy ships pushed deeper into the field, their formation faltered. Rocks the size of battleships twisted unpredictably, slamming into the nearest pursuers with the force of an extinction event. The lead vessel tried to maneuver away, but the Ark's defenses anticipated every move. Within moments, 2 enemy ships were reduced to wreckage. Ethan let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to underestimate ancient aliens." Cyrile turned back to the console, fingers tightening. "It's not enough. More will come." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "Then we get out before they surround us." Before she could respond, the ship's hum faltered, then shut down. The glowing pathways across the walls flickered, then died, leaving them in cold, eerie silence. Cyrile's breath caught. "No, no, no, no." She pressed her hands to the console, but it did not respond. Something is blocking it. Ethan's instincts screamed at him just a second before the first shot rang out. A plasma bolt hit the wall just inches from Cyrile's head. Ethan spun, gun raised, just as a group of figures emerged from the shadows of the Ark. Humans. At least, mostly human. The leader stepped forward, lowering his rifle slightly with an infuriating smirk. His face was rugged, marked by old battle scars. He was dressed in mercenary armor, but it was the unnatural gleam in his eyes that set Ethan on edge. A glint of something. Augmented. "Ethan Hayes," the man drawled. "You've always had a way of stumbling into the wrong places." Ethan narrowed his eyes. Bran Vaughn, former soldier, now a bounty hunter with a reputation as ruthless as the void itself. Ethan had crossed paths with him years ago, in a war that left them both with grudges. But Bran wasn't alone. His men spread out, weapons trained. And they weren't just here for a bounty. Bran's gaze flicked to Cyrile. A slow, satisfied smile crept across his face. "And this must be the last of the Lyrans." Cyrile stiffened, her tattoos glowing faintly with distress. Ethan shifted instinctively in front of her, his gun steady. "You knew she was here." Bran chuckled. "Knew. I led them here." The weight of those words sank into Ethan's stomach like a lead anchor. He had been careful, covering their tracks, staying ahead of their pursuers. But Bran, he had been a step ahead all along. Cyrile's voice was sharp. "You sold us out." Bran tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Don't take it personally, Princess. You're worth a hell of a lot of credits. Your DNA, it's the key to a weapon people would kill to control." He smirked. "And let's be honest, are killing for." Ethan's grip on his pistol tightened. "And what's in it for you? Aside from selling out humanity." Brand's smile turned cold. "Power, Hayes. The same thing it's always about." Ethan didn't wait. He fired. The first shot went wide as Brand dodged. But the second hit home. One of the mercenaries went down with a grunt. The room exploded into chaos. Ethan grabbed Cyrile's arm. "Run." She didn't hesitate. They sprinted down the Ark's corridors, Ethan laying down covering fire as Brand's men pursued. The ship groaned beneath them, its systems in flux from Brand's sabotage. "How do we stop them from taking control of the ship?" Ethan shouted. Cyrile's breath came fast. "We can't, not while the core is compromised." Ethan risked a glance back. Bran and his team were gaining. They needed to change the game. The corridor ahead split into multiple pathways. Ethan made a split-second decision. He shoved Cyrile down one passage. "Hide. No matter what happens." Cyrile's eyes flared. "No, I want." His grip tightened on her wrist. "I'll come back for you. I promise." She hesitated, searching his face. Finally, she nodded, slipping into the shadows. Ethan turned to face Bran alone. His gun was raised, his stance unwavering. Bran grinned, leveling his own weapon. "Let's finish this." The reckoning. The Ark trembled as the enemy fleet loomed outside the asteroid field, their blockade tightening. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Ethan Hayes stood his ground against Bran Vaughn and his mercenaries. His pulse was steady, his gun aimed at the man who had sold them out. Bran smirked, stepping forward, his weapon lazily resting in his grip. "You always had a hero complex, Hayes. But this time, you're outgunned, outnumbered, and..." Ethan shot first. The plasma bolt seared past Bran's cheek, forcing him to dodge. But Ethan wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. The shot hit a console behind Bran, sending sparks flying and plunging part of the corridor into darkness. In the chaos, Ethan ducked behind a metal column, reloading as Bran's men returned fire. He needed a way to turn the fight. He needed her. Cyrile ran through the ship's corridors, her glowing tattoos dimming as she fought to control her breathing. She could still hear the echoes of battle behind her, Ethan buying her time. But time was not what they needed. They needed a way out. Then she saw it. A chamber pulsing with ancient energy. She didn't understand how she knew, but she did. Instinct guided her, leading her to the Ark's heart. It was still alive. Weak, flickering, but alive. The control interface in front of her was built for Lyran hands. She pressed her palms against it, feeling warmth spread through her skin as the ship recognized her. A voice, soft, fragmented, whispered into her mind. "Last daughter of Lyran, are you prepared to awaken the past?" Cyrile hesitated, then whispered back, "I am." Power surged through the ship. Ethan ducked as a plasma bolt slammed into the wall behind him. Bran's mercenaries were closing in, and he was running out of places to hide. Then the Ark roared. The entire ship lit up with a surge of energy, sending a pulse outward. Bran cursed as his cybernetic enhancements sparked, his augmented vision flickering. "What the hell?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, using Bran's momentary distraction to knock his weapon aside. They struggled, fists colliding, old grudges surfacing in every brutal punch. "You sold out humanity for power," Ethan snarled, driving his knee into Bran's ribs. "What kind of man does that?" Bran coughed, but still smirked. "The kind who survives." He swung wildly, landing a solid hit to Ethan's jaw. Ethan stumbled, but before Bran could finish him off, Cyrile arrived. Her presence filled the corridor with a blinding glow, her tattoos now fully ignited, her golden eyes burning with something ancient, something powerful. The Ark spoke through her. Intruders detected. Defense protocol engage. Ethan barely had time to react before the ship itself came alive. The walls shifted, forming barriers. Plasma turrets, long dormant, hummed with energy, locking onto Brand's mercenaries. They barely had time to scream. Brand turned, eyes wide. No. A blast from the ship's own systems slammed into him, sending him crashing against the wall. His cybernetics shorted out, his body twitching as he slumped to the floor. Ethan pulled himself up, staring at Cirili in awe. "Remind me never to piss you off." She turned to him, breathing heavily, a small, tired smile forming. Noted. Outside, the enemy fleet realized too late what was happening. The asteroid field, once a graveyard of drifting rocks, now moved with purpose. The Ark controlled it, twisting the debris into weapons. One by one, the enemy ships were struck down, crushed, impaled, shattered. The blockade fell apart. And when the last ship exploded into nothing, the Ark finally fell silent. The aftermath was quiet. Ethan sat on the edge of the Ark's docking bay, his body aching, his knuckles bloodied. Cirili sat beside him, her glow fading as exhaustion crept in. "So," he said after a long moment, "what now?" She gazed at the void where their enemies had once been. "The war isn't over." "Not yet." He nodded. "Then we keep running." She shook her head. "No." She turned to face him fully, her expression steady. "We stop running. We fight back." Ethan smirked, rolling his shoulders. "You're starting to sound human." Cirili tilted her head. "And you, Ethan Hayes, are not like any human I have ever met." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. A bond forged in battle, in survival, in something deeper neither dared name just yet. Instead, he reached out, offering his hand. She took it, and together, they stepped into the unknown.